Willow Creek was the kind of town where nothing ever seemed to change. Nestled in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless fields of wheat and corn, it was a place where everyone knew each other's business. The biggest event of the year was always the annual Pumpkin Festival. Families from all around the county came to enjoy the food stalls, the games, and most importantly, the Scarecrow competition. Every year, people competed to see who could craft the most impressive scarecrow to stand proudly in the fields during the harvest. This year was no different. The festival was in full swing, children's laughter filling the air, families strolling through the rows of pumpkins, their breath visible in the cool, crisp air, orange and yellow leaves dancing along the streets as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the town square. But there was something different about this year's Scarecrow competition. As people wandered through the rows of scarecrows, marveling at the creativity, one figure stood out, a scarecrow unlike any other. It was taller than the others, almost unnervingly so. Its body was made of thick, gnarled branches, dressed in tattered clothing that flapped lightly in the wind. Its face wasn't a cheerful jack-o'-lantern like the others. Instead, it had hollow eyes made of dried-out corn husks and a mouth stitched shut with rough twine. Its expression was frozen in a twisted grimace that seemed to follow you wherever you went. Among them was Jack Williams, a local farmer struggling to keep his family's farm afloat. His crops had failed that year, and he was on the verge of losing everything. He heard about the stories everyone had, but he was desperate enough to believe it, if only for a moment, that the legend might be real. Jack found himself standing before the Scarecrow, the festival's distant noises fading into the background. The moon was high now, casting a silvery light over the figure, making its hollow eyes gleam unnervingly. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer. "I don't know if you can hear me," he whispered, feeling a bit foolish. "But if the stories are true, I wish for my farm to be saved. I need a good harvest. Just one more good harvest." The wind picked up suddenly, sending a shiver down Jack's spine. For a moment, it felt as if the Scarecrow had moved. But when he looked closer, it stood still, its expression unchanged. Jack shook his head, trying to laugh it off. It was just a silly story after all. Wishes don't come true like that. Or so he thought. The next morning, Jack awoke to the sound of rain drumming against his window. He bolted upright, his heart racing. It hadn't rained in weeks, and the drought had left his crops withering in the fields. But as he rushed outside, he found his fields drenched, the soil dark and rich. His crops were thriving, more so than they had in years. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. It was a miracle. Word spread quickly. Jack's farm was saved, and soon others began visiting the Scarecrow, each with their own wishes. A mother wished for her sick child to recover, and the next day, the boy was miraculously healed. A shopkeeper wished for his business to flourish, and within days, he was swamped with customers. But with every wish granted, something strange began to happen. The Scarecrow's appearance changed. Its hollow eyes seemed to glow faintly at night, and its twisted grin grew wider, more sinister. Some people swore they saw it move out of the corner of their eyes, but when they turned to look, it was still as ever. It didn't take long for the town to realize that the wishes came at a price. Jack's crops, once so vibrant, began to rot from the inside out, blackened and diseased. The boy, who had been healed from his illness, began having terrible nightmares, waking up screaming each night. The shopkeeper's sudden success came at the cost of his family, who grew distant and cold, eventually leaving him entirely. The Scarecrow's grin widened with each passing day, feeding off the misery it had sown. The townspeople, once excited about the festival, now avoided the fields altogether, whispering in fear of what they had unleashed. The festival returned the following year, as it always did, but this time no one dared go near the Scarecrow. It stood alone in the field, taller than ever, its twisted face locked in an eternal sneer. The harvest moon loomed overhead, casting an eerie glow over the town. But there was always someone willing to make a wish. As the night wore on, a figure appeared before the Scarecrow. It was the same farmer, Jack Williams, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, his life in ruins. He had lost everything: the farm, his family, even his will to live. But he had one last wish. "I wish," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I wish I had never made that first wish." The wind howled through the fields, and for a moment, Jack could swear the Scarecrow's grin faltered. But it was too late. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, and the shadows around him deepened, stretching toward him like grasping hands. Jack tried to run, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The Scarecrow loomed closer, its eyes glowing brighter, its grin splitting wide open. The last thing Jack heard was the sound of rustling straw as the Scarecrow's twisted face melted into darkness. And then, nothing. The next morning, the people of Willow Creek awoke to find the Scarecrow gone. No one knew what had happened to it, and no one dared to ask. But every year, when the harvest moon rose high in the sky, people swore they could still feel its presence, lurking just beyond the fields, waiting for the next desperate soul to make a wish.